Hello and welcome to Sunday Chat for the 11th of November, which happens to be the 32nd Sunday in Ordinary Time. And today I'm going to look at the first reading from Kings and then the Gospel reading from Mark. And in each text we have a widow. And in the reading from Kings we have the widow who gives her last bit of flour, her last bit of oil to make a cake for Elijah, who is also hungry. This is her last bit of food in the house, and she believes that by giving the flour and the oil to Elijah, that she and her son are going to starve. And he says, well, no, what the Lord has promised is that the jug of oil will never run dry and the jar of flour will never run out either. And this is what actually happens. So by giving away her last morsel of food, she actually ensures prosperity for herself and her son, which is a really uplifting kind of story for anyone who donates out of their lack rather than out of their surplus. And then in the Gospel we have the story of the widow who gives her last 2 coins into the treasury. And everybody else is probably noticing the wealthy people who are very public about their lavish generosity. There they are, putting their money in very public view into the treasury and feeling very smug and proud of themselves, most likely. And then there's this widow who gives basically what she cannot afford. She's giving the money that otherwise she would have spent on food or perhaps even on housing. And that money goes into the treasury. She's donating it for the well-being of society. She's doing it out of religious conviction. And so Jesus calls attention to his disciples so that they see her and notice her and don't just write her off as some pauper, because as a widow, of course, she would have had no means of employment. She would not have had a male relative to look after her, most likely, and therefore she was sort of doomed to poverty. But I want to look at the story of the widow who donates her last 2 coins in a rather unusual way, and I want to look at it in terms of time. We often talk about sharing our treasure, sharing our talent, and perhaps we can relate the giving of money and the giving of our gifts to the church as on a parallel to the widow who gives her last 2 coins. But what about our time, and precisely what about our time in relationship to God? And this brings us to the whole subject of prayer. In a very busy world where we're all so frantically running around achieving so much, or trying to achieve it as the case may be, time is one of the smallest commodities that we actually have. It's what we lack the most, I think, many of us. We all have our list of things to do, we all have our list of things we would like to do, and we always fall short. It seems that there's never enough time to do everything. And so sometimes God gets left on the back burner, to use a cliche. Sometimes God gets left the leftovers in terms of our time and our availability. And we might let this happen because it's so much more important to get that report written, or to catch up with that freelance project, or to complete that student paper, or whatever it is that we have to do, that conference call, that meeting. And one by one we have our list of things to do, and each time we set our hearts on getting something accomplished, God gets pushed into the background. And so this is, I think, a common phenomenon, and many of us struggle with trying to make enough time in our day, in a very busy day, for prayer. So how do we do it? How do we give God time? Well, if we take the widow's mite, or the widow's 2 coins principle, we give from our lack. In other words, we don't wait till we have enough time, but we actually pray when we don't have enough time, which sounds paradoxical. So in the height of our busyness, that's probably the best time to pray. In the height of having 1,000 things to do, that might be the best time to take time out for quiet and reflection. Or to go for a walk and pray while we're walking, or jogging, or however else it is that we most connect to God. For some of us it's sitting, for some of us it's moving, for some of us it's with music, and for others it's in silence. But whatever our way of connecting, we can make time in our schedules if we're willing to put God first and prioritize that way, and then assume that just as the jar of flour will never run out and the jug of oil will never run dry, so even if we give God our time that we needed to write that report, the time will surface at some other time when we can accomplish this. Because this seems to be the principle. When we give away what we don't have, whether it be time, talent, or treasure, somehow God seems to compensate. When we put God first, somehow we find the time that we need to get the work done. And so when we're most busy and decide to sit and pray or walk and pray or wherever else we're going to be praying, at that very time of being the most busy, that's precisely when we should be praying. And paradoxically, there's always enough time. It seems time does not run out any more than the flour or the oil. So there's a reflection for the 11th of November. I hope you find it useful, and I look forward to seeing you next Sunday for the 33rd Sunday in Ordinary Time. And we're rapidly approaching the end of the liturgical year and the Feast of Christ the King. But for now, I'll just simply say goodbye from Sunday Chat, and I look forward to being with you again soon.